go off mute and just ask a question. I mean, we really want to make sure we're presenting information that's of value to you as I move through this. So really going to focus on two different pieces. Within CalOES, I report to Pat Mallon. So if you send him an email, tell him how great a job we're doing, that'd be awesome. But I have two groups under me. One is Emergency Communications, and they support the State Operations Center Emergency Support Function 2, the communication coordinators that are in all the various mutual aid regions throughout the state, and the statewide interoperability coordinator. So I'm going to give that update. And then 911 is also something that is in my branch that we handle. So happy to answer questions for either of those. We're going to start out with, I think we are, if my slides will advance. There we go. With the CalSEC. So our next meeting is on November 17th. Many of the slides that I'm going to be presenting are from that presentation, but they're going to go into a lot more detail there. If you're interested in becoming more involved in either any one of these planning areas, and for the folks on this phone, on this meeting, it's probably more likely the Northern Planning Area and the Capital Bay Planning Area, please reach out to us. We'd love to get you involved in the conversation and what we're doing in terms of interoperability between agencies at the local level, and obviously with state agencies as well. So these are our planning areas. We have a chair and a vice chair. As you can see in the Capital Bay area, if you're interested in serving, there is a position open. Please let us know. And I know that Weedy and Mike in the north would certainly appreciate others willing to step into that role. They've been leading that charge for a long time and would certainly appreciate some help. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go through some of the activities that we at CalOES have been completing in support of our technical assistance request. Technical assistance requests are authorizations from FEMA that are supported through the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, and they're additional training and opportunities that we get in California. We typically get 5 each year, and occasionally we'll get a couple extra ones shown in because we've demonstrated the ability that we actually use these. A couple that we just completed: the SCIP workshop. The SCIP is the Statewide Communications Interoperability Plan. That was just released and it's posted on our website. That really has the strategic vision of where we're headed for communications, and probably most important to the local agencies. There's a number of goals in there, and if you're going to be submitting for an emergency communications grant or Homeland Security grant, you have to align your communications request with one of those goals that are in the SCIP, and that's available on our website, and you can see the goals that are there. We also recently updated the CalIFOG, that's the Interoperable Field Operations Guide, and we now have an electronic version that you can download to your mobile device through either the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. We also have a PDF version of that on our website that you can download there as well. So those are a couple of the tools that are out there. The iFOG has all the interoperability channels and PL codes and everything you need to communicate. Other things we're working on: we had many trainings that were in the works and approved through technical assistance requests, and then COVID hit, and the ability to meet in person pretty much went away. So we're now working with them to do online versions of these courses. This course in particular could probably benefit from that, because most 911 centers and PSAPs, they don't have the ability to send somebody away, a dispatcher away, for training. So we're thinking this format is going to be really good moving forward. What I've put on each one of these is the point of contact at CalOES that you can reach out to if you're interested in this class. We're still working on a date, but this is something that's coming, an Instant Tactical Dispatch training course. We're also looking at an Instant Communications Center Manager course. Again, this is something that will be happening in 2021, as these courses have to be transitioned into an online version. We're working on an AUXCOM course. It's an auxiliary communications course. So you're thinking ham radio in your mind. And the Northern Planning Area is the lead on this. Again, we're working on this for 2021 to have as a remote offering. and then also an all hazards comm tech course. So a communications technician, a little different than a communications unit leader. And this is what we're working on for in the spring of 2021. In conjunction with those, what we realize is that when you finish the training, you need to have an opportunity to apply those skills in an exercise format. So we're working to establish some communication exercises. Again, without the ability to meet in person, these become very challenging. And so we're still working toward this to try and get something planned and in place where we can actually exercise the skills that were learned in the classroom, or maybe you've gone through previous classes and have never participated in an exercise to validate your task book is really what this is all about, and gain the experience you need in that particular field. So we're working on a communications unit exercise, and we're also working on a full-scale exercise that focuses on communications. That's something else that we're working on. So you've got the point of contacts for CalOES. You can reach out to us. We'll link you up with those that are planning these activities. We're pretty excited about, what's coming and where this is headed. So I'm going to pause there before I go on, because I'm going to kind of transition into something else to see if anybody has any questions for me related to these items. All right, hearing none. I can't see the chat window.
Yeah, I'm watching it for you, Budge.
All right, beautiful. Okay, so moving on. Once you get your task book filled out and you've got all your training and you're ready to go, there was a gap in California where we didn't have a way to formally recognize at the state level that you had completed those, and to become, I don't know, certified is probably the wrong word, because it's not really a certification. It's really just a recognition that you've done the work required to be serving in these various communication unit positions. So Shelley has established a communications working group. We've had a couple of meetings. They've been very successful. They are going to meet monthly. I don't know if anyone on my team is on the call to tell me when the November meeting is. I didn't look that up. But basically, it's a way to validate that your task book has been completed, and then you work through a process with Shelley and this board, and they just make sure you've got everything in alignment, submit, and then they recognize that you've completed that training. So it's an important element that's been missing. We've also made sure we've correlated it to what's required in fire scope and doesn't impact the what's happening in the all hazards space versus what's happening in the national wildfire space. So we recognize the difference of those two, and this is really for the all hazards. We're not trying to duplicate anything that fire scope is doing, and that process remains intact. So if you're interested in this, reach out to Shelley. She can send you the meeting invite. If you've also been trying to get your task book and your certification or your state recognized process completed, certainly reach out to Shelley and she can help you with that. I want to give you an update on a couple other pretty big projects we're working on. One of them is the California Radio Interoperable System. Those of you who heard Eric Dye present on this, I think he gave a really good presentation to the group. Give you a couple of updates of where we're at here, and then talk about some interoperable communications related to this. This was approved through a budget change proposal. What that means is CalOES went to the legislature, asked for funding from general fund. We were granted that funding, and now we've started to build out the system. And the system is really in it. We've got the initial deployment done, and I'm going to give you a couple of slides as to where we are now. But you can see the year 2 deployment and where we are, and we are still on schedule for these dates that you see on this slide. And we're moving ahead with the project as planned. This is sort of an expected coverage map down the valley. This coverage is in place. Many of the engineers and CalOES team members have tested this coverage. It's pretty accurate to what you see here. Obviously, this is pretty grand at a high level, down to the granular level. You can reach out to us and we can share that information with you. This is what we're working on, what they are working on building out now in the Bay Area. And this shows prediction models for the coverage in the Bay Area and what sites will be involved in this system as they're completing that build out. And this will be ready November, December 2020 timeframe is when this portion of the system will be built out. So where are we headed with all this? There's a multi-phase project. It is a budget change proposal process, meaning that it's watched very closely by the legislature. So these dates are fixed and very difficult to make adjustments to them. So this is a realistic depiction of what it's going to look out for the rollout process statewide. And you can see there's a number of phases here, and we're about ready to finish up phase 2. You can see we're into that. Next will be phase 3, and they're already starting to do the work required down in LA and Ventura and Orange, and then they'll work on the Central Coast. We'll be providing periodic updates on where this process is going. But what we want you to understand is that this is an interoperable system. So the idea is that at the local level, you would be able to program a talk group into your radio that could communicate on the system. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. We don't have to get into all the technical details now, but for space purposes in your code plug, we've come up with a draft interop talk plan. We're going to vet this through the California, through the CalSEC to make sure that this supports the needs. But we really want each of you to be thinking about, if we come up with this talk group plan, does it support the interoperability talk groups that you need to move forward? And you can see we kind of broke these up into 3 pieces: a state, county, and then a mutual aid region. And each of them is designed to come up with a number of talk groups, a calling channel, 1 per agency, 1 per county, 1 for mutual aid region, and then a number of tactical talk groups that are used to facilitate interoperability. And we're using the 3-digit agency codes or county codes or mutual aid region codes in order to differentiate the calling channels. So really want to get your input on this, so you can tell us if you think this plan makes sense, and if it aligns with the needs that you have down at the local and county and regional level. All right, so that's pretty much it on the SWIC side. So I've got one more, I'm going to talk about broadband services in here as well. So our broadband services unit is really focused on making sure that public safety has access to broadband. So what we've done so far, we've got a number of contracts that are available through CalNet. Each local agency can use that state contract vehicle. It's 9.1 is the section for FirstNet and AT&T, and 19.2 is the section for T-Mobile, Sprint, and Verizon. And we've built into their SLAs, service level agreements, basically requirements in the contract to meet service levels for public safety. And we built in competitive pricing. So these contracts are available now. The next thing we're working on is a best practices document that really highlights some of the things you should be considering when you deploy a broadband solution, whether that be FirstNet, who Kevin just presented his presentation before me, or some other provider that you may choose at the local level. So I want to let you know that this best practice document is coming. We're going to be voting on it at the CalSEC on November 17th and getting feedback and updates on that. And then it'll be available to you. We also can assist you in a gap analysis at the local level and really help you through different solution needs. Lately, what we've done in response to the wildfires and some of the public safety power shutoffs and evacuation centers, disaster recovery centers, local area assistance centers, command centers, incident command posts, and staging areas, those things. If there's a gap you have in communications, you can reach out to CalOES. We have emergency support function 2, and we can work with you to address those gaps. Please don't come to us with a solution. In other words, don't give us a call and say, we need a FirstNet cap. that may end up being what you need. However, we want to make sure we do the proper needs analysis to know that what is the need so we can align the resource with the need. So we're going to ask you things like, what's your coverage deficiency? What carrier are you trying to solve? How many users are involved? Do you need Wi-Fi? What's the duration of the incident? Those basic type questions. And again, those are some of the things that are being rolled up into this best practice document so that then we can align the proper resource with whatever need that you have locally. And we've done a lot of this activity over the last 8 or 9 months. I say we, it's really Hank and his team. And he's got 2 supervisors that work under him, Josh and Shelly, and then a number of folks that support them that have been doing this work, and they've just been doing phenomenal things in this space. So I'm going to pause here and see Tim, if you see any questions coming in or anybody has anything for us on this.
So far, nothing in the chat. I'll give you one. As far as you know, do we have any good starting document that goes from, let's say, a line level dispatcher, supervisor, manager, and begins to walk them through that process of, the entire world of radio leading up to like CalSeek? Because I know that as I ask around, most folks, unless they're really, really deep into radio, it's hard to find anyone within our department that if I ask what's a task book, I might get an answer from 1 out of 100 folks,
Yeah, so that's a great question. We do have some documentation, but it's volumes of documentation on each one of those subjects. I think where the gap probably is something concise, sort of the decoder ring that you need to map through to where extra information is. I don't think we have that. That's probably a good ask. So I'm going to actually take a note here and see if I can remember that. Which if any of my team members are listening, this will correlate directly into extra work for you.
Yeah, and you know what I'll do, shamelessly plug, we just saw from National APCO, they put together a video and it was, kind of a silly cartoon, but there was a lot of good information, like what APCO or any other organization offers for you. So I wonder even something like that, a quick presentation to go from, a radio guy or a dispatcher or whatever your starting point is to get you developed, on the radio side of things.
Yeah, so we have a graphic we've used a lot called Connecting the Technology. And I think I might even have it at the end of this presentation. I might not, but it sort of helps define the lanes of Next Gen 911, land mobile radio, alerts and warnings, and then broadband. And it's shocking the number of folks who mix those different technologies together and interchange the terms thinking that they all mean the same thing. So I think you're right. There's a lot of education that needs to go on here where folks could benefit from something that tells them what each of these terms mean and how you progress through it. If you have an interest in one of those lanes, how do you become educated as to what's available there? I think that's some good feedback.
And it looks like we have one question. Can other manufacturers other than Motorola join the new California state system?
So because of the common area interface and P25, yes, that's possible. When you go to talk about in the P25 standard and you're trying to do the core-to-core connection, that's a bigger challenge. And so what we've talked about is to have a gateway between the two where you've got talk groups defined on your system. We have talk groups defined on our system. And through a gateway device, we enable those talk groups to communicate one with another. It just removes a lot of the complexity of having to exchange system keys and getting down to the ISSI connection that would have to happen between P25. But yes, any radio manufacturer that supports P25 700 megahertz trunking would be able to communicate on this system, provided they're not using some kind of proprietary solution in that device, like a proprietary, something proprietary. So if it's a true P25 radio that follows the common area interface standard, absolutely.
And it looks like we got one more. Okay, would we be able to make the task books digital with a workflow training application?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't know if we've even talked about digital task books, but that is a great question. I like that, and we'll take that back and get a response.
Pamela is bringing the heat. I like it.
Yeah, no, that's really good because that would be the next step. You know, I can tell you I've received personally a number of those copies of task books to validate. So yeah, that's really good. I like that. Okay. Other questions? Anything at all related to the interoperability or radio or anything that we're doing over here at CalOES? It's all fair game.
Hey, Budge, it's Doug Kiner at Mountain View. I sent the message to the chat, but just before you go on here, for those of us that are new to the P25 world, but don't have perhaps visibility into what's going on with the statewide system and as it gets rolled out, and should we now be programming as we touch our radios, which is expensive and disruptive, but we have to do it seemingly every year now. Should we be preparing our radios now for the system, the 700 megahertz trunk system that might not be available currently in our area, but would be in the next 12 to 18 months, or should we wait until we receive guidance to do so?
So that's a great question, Doug. Thank you. Yes, if we can get you the details needed to do that interface, and it would reduce a touch. So let me put that for action. I saw Uriel on the previous, he's our lead engineer that's working on deployment of Chris. I'll follow up with him to see if there's a barrier there. And then at the next CalSeek meeting, we'll provide guidance, and then we can push that information out to the wider group using the using every way we have to reach you. One of the biggest challenges we have is there's what, 2,000 or 3,000 agencies or so, I don't know what the number is, and finding a good point of contact to get the right guidance information out to the right people is one of the big challenges that we have. So once we get that document finalized, we'll push that out so that those that are in your situation where you're considering touching all the radios and doing a programming, at least you'd have the information needed to program that radio.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay, so that's sort of, I wanted to spend about 30 minutes on that, and it looks like I came pretty close to hitting my target. The next one, the next piece of the organization is 911. And I noticed there was a lot of 911 content in the presentations that have gone on both yesterday and today. So I appreciate the focus on that. I thought I'd dedicate a little bit of time to this. We're doing a lot of outreach in this space. And
hey, Budge.
Yeah.
We got one more came in.
Beautiful.
All right, is California statewide system going to incorporate the new APCO WACN 101 system that is being used for the presidential inauguration to make that deployable in California?
I do not know the answer to that. I would have to look that up.
That is an in-depth question.
That is. Boy, that's way down in the weeds. We'll find out. I'll try and get an answer for you. Again, I'll reach back out to Uriel on that, okay? Great question, though.
Hey, Budge, this is John Lemon. That's related to the trunk deployable channels. And it's something that's really new. It's only been discussed probably in the last month, just as an FYI.
So, John, great to hear your voice. Trusting retirement is awesome. How's it going?
Good. Everybody should try it.
I love it. So are those the National Mutual Aid 700 megahertz trunk talk groups? Is that what that is?
Yes. Just as kind of a quick brief on what happened is the original intent was we could have deployable trunk systems on those 700 channels, and then agencies from across the country could roll into a certain area and operate on those trunked deployable excuse me, channels. What Washington, D.C. found out was that, yes, they could roam into those areas and operate on those trunk channels, but only within their own system. So, for instance, if the California Highway Patrol went to the inauguration and went to talk group 1 on that deployable trunk system, the CHP units could talk amongst themselves. The Washington, D.C. units could talk to themselves within talk group 1 because the system IDs were 2 different system IDs, CHP couldn't talk to the Washington, D.C. units or vice versa. So we had to make a quick change within the last few months and come up with this whacking ID of 101 that we're going to be recommending that all of the trunk deployable systems use, and that will make it truly interoperable across the nation for any units to come in. So, but it's something that's really come up in the last month as being finalized. So there'll be more information coming out.
Okay, John, that's some great feedback. One of the resources we have in CalOES is a MGU, a mobile interoperable gateway unit. And those typically have gateways in it to tie together single channel resources. We're working on a refresh of that technology and we want to include in it a site that would be on CRIS and also a site on this 700 meg P25 interoperable talk group to what John just spoke to. So when we deploy ours, we'll make sure that we use that common network ID so that we have that interoperability. So that's a great question. Thank you. Okay, so moving along, please, if you have another question, don't hesitate to interrupt. Talk a little bit about Next Gen 911. Those of you that have been tracking this project, originally these estimated completions on the deployment timeline were in March. Due to COVID and a million other things, actually 3.5 million, I think, is the current wildfire acreage that has burned. So those 3.5 million reasons. We pushed these dates out a little bit. We do think it will be in 2021, unless the alien invasion happens that they're next predicting, or the zombie apocalypse, or whatever 2021 is going to have for us. But we still are on track. We're making good progress. What you see on this graphic is the regions that we're deploying in the state, the vendors that are responsible for those regions, and then also our network provider that is connected to our core system provider that's connected to every single PSAP in the state, Atos. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple of quick slides on this to let you know where we are with the deployment. And I really hope you have some good questions for me to help dive down into the weeds, just to get a sense of where you're at. So we're at the place now where we need to install the equipment at 438 PSAPs. We need to make sure we ingress the originating service provider, OSP traffic. Those are those that are providing 911 dial tone to somebody. We also need to figure out our test and integration to make all this work together. And then finally, we'll do our transition. So I'm going to touch very briefly, and I mean very briefly, on each of these areas. It's an extremely large project. We have 27 million 911 calls a year. There's roughly 4,000 endpoints in this network. And it's all going to be an IP version 6 network. And we have SD-WAN controllers tied into the whole thing. So it's extremely complex. But I'm going to give you a sense of where we're at. We started back in August of 2019. And so what you see here is a bunch of parallel tracks that we've been working on. We're now at the point where we're installing circuits. We're doing PSAP equipment installs. Every one of the providers has built and designed their network operations center, and we're in the final stages of core services test and integration. The next thing we'll do is to begin testing at each individual PSAP throughout the state in order to make sure that we're ready to do go live. There's still a small chance we will go live at the end of this year, but certainly in January 2021, we will be going live. So from your PSAP's perspective, this is what this looks like. You've got two providers that are coming into your PSAP. In blue, that PNSP is the prime network service provider, that's Atos. And the orange section here is the regional network service provider. For most of you in the north, that will be Synergim. There are a couple of areas perhaps that will be central, what we're calling central region, and so that would be provided by NGA 911. So each of them has a number of connections that come into your 911 center. And as I said, this is an IPv6 network, and it's layered and segmented, so it doesn't have any single points of failure. So 911 traffic comes in from the left-hand side there, is processed by one or two dual data centers that are in active mode, and then it gets routed down to your public safety answering point across multiple fixed IP connections, as well as an integrated LTE solution. And then just to make sure that we don't go offline, we're building out CAPSnet, which is the statewide microwave network, into these PSAPs as well. And we're starting that build out in areas where we don't have a lot of network diversity on the IP connections. So that's what it looks like from the perspective of your PSAP. Now, where are we exactly? Well, if I was to provide all 438 and show you the tracking charts and everything, the graphics just get terrible and you can't really figure it out. This is a high level view of where we are. When we say PSAP remediation, we mean the rack is installed, the rack is powered properly, and it's ready for equipment to go in. Then we come and install the region's equipment. And when the region is completed, Atos comes in and sets up their equipment, and then we do our test and integration. So this is where we are in the north. I don't think we have anybody from the south on the phone, so or in the meeting, but that's our status of where we are in the south. And then here's where we are in the central and LA regions. These numbers are about a week old, so they all have changed slightly as we're doing anywhere from 5 to 10 to 20 installs, depending on what throughout the state and where we are in the deployment timeline. So once we get the equipment installed, we need to transition. So I want to pretty quickly go through what transition looks like. And we're not calling it cutover because it's not really a cutover, and you'll see why in a minute. So today, an originating service provider connects into a selective router, and that selective router makes the decision of where that call should go, and it delivers it to your PSAP. And some PSAPs, like PSAP B in this photo, are connected to multiple selective routers, and that's not uncommon for us. We have a total of 45 selective routers in the state, and we have 438 PSAPs, and there's a network all over the place. What we're going to do is we're going to install and test a next-gen 911 network. All that installation stuff that I just mentioned is going to happen. And once we get to that place, we now have the ability to deliver a 911 call into your PSAP across legacy through a selective router or across next-gen 911 through this green dotted line configuration. So at that point, we're technically ready to start delivering calls to your center. So that dotted line configuration is what we're working on right now to finish that build out statewide. And what that means is when we connect the dotted line to your PSAP, remediation is done, meaning the rack's installed, power's there and everything. Both Atos and your region have installed the equipment. The IP circuits are in. The CPE is connected to that router handoff, and we've completed an acceptance test plan to validate PSAP can receive 911 calls over legacy and NG 911, and we go through a variety of test calls and failover scenarios. And we also look at your transfers. Where are you transferring calls today? And making sure that all that is mapped into this new next-gen world, which is not a star code anymore. It's a URI, which is a Uniform Resource Identifier, which to you would look like a like a URL or, you know, like a website name. And that's how we're going to get through this. Now, we have to then think about, if we start pushing live 911 calls into your center and you receive them on NextGen, you have to transfer them on NextGen. So we have to think about who you transfer to and make sure all of those PSAPs are ready too. And we're calling that a transfer cluster. So we can start sending you live NextGen 911 calls when everybody you transfer to can also start receiving them. I got a couple of graphics on this to help you understand it. When we do this testing, the acceptance test plan is probably going to be done in a single day, because we do all of our testing behind the scenes to make sure we're ready. We'll schedule it a couple of weeks in advance at a minimum, and then we place test calls by each provider. Once we start moving 911 traffic, and I'll show you that in a graphic in a second, each carrier will also have to go through a similar testing process. So there's a lot of testing involved in this, and we realize that this has an impact to your PSAP. So we're going to work with you to mitigate that impact. So this transfer cluster includes everybody that you transfer 911 calls to today across a 911 trunk. These are not 10-digit transfers. These are 911 call transfers. So we look at the star code list. We look at the selective router circuits. We use ECATS data, which is our system we use for statewide call tracking, to figure out what that is, and then we validate it all with you, the PSAP, and the CPE vendor to make sure that we're correct. So I'll give you an example of what this looks like, and we'll go through this kind of fast, but you'll get a sense of what we're talking about. So this is Sonora PD. They're one of the ones that will go earlier in the process. They're in phase 1, and you see that there's a number of 911 transfers they have, specifically CAL FIRE, San Andreas, CHP Merced, Tuolumne County Sheriff, and Calaveras County Sheriff. Those are their 911 transfers. So it's a pretty simple example, but before we can direct live traffic over across NextGen 911 into Sonora, we have to make sure all these other PSAPs are ready as well. And then we look at ECATS to validate that the star codes are there, and from this data, we can see that that's valid. There is a transfer here to Fresno County Sheriff, which is an anomaly, so they're not in the transfer cluster because there's no 911 circuits to transfer 911 calls to Fresno County from Sonora PD. So this is what the diagram looks like. We update it. These are the exact PSAPs that have to be ready. We need to get that dotted line into every single one of them, and then we can start the process of steering the originating service providers that you see in the left-hand part of the diagram. We can begin to steer them into the right PSAP. So what we then say is we say, okay, AT&T wireline, your traffic that's destined for Sonora PD, don't send it to the Sonora selective router anymore. Please send that to the NextGen 911 network, and they will deliver those calls. And then we just work OSP by OSP. And we do this process and we repeat it 438 times, and we're completed and the state is transitioned, right? Piece of cake. And we've got a schedule developed on what that looks like. And here's how many PSAPs are impacted as we start to transition. You can see there's 5 phases. We're going to start the first phase in December, the second phase in February, then we do March, and then finally April, May. Or April. And keep in mind that your PSAP could go for some time where some originating service providers have been transitioned to NextGen and some haven't, and that's perfectly fine. And then once we transition everybody over, we shouldn't see traffic coming through anymore for those selective routers. All right, so I'm going to pause there because that's a lot of information, and I'm going to see what questions you guys have, because I know that's a lot.
So I got 2 budgets. The first one is with these new what used to be star codes, the URIs. Even if we don't have a ton of traffic, are we limited to how many we can have? So for us, we rarely transfer to LA, but it does come up a few times a year. So can we simply tack on as many as we like, or is there limits?
So there is no limit. Probably the only limit would be the physical geography on your CPE screen. That's probably the limiting factor to actually put the button, which is the interface that you click to make the transfer. But in the next gen world, there's no limit. However, to make the transition, we're going to make sure that any existing 911 transfers are supported. And then we will add in, because remember, there's a whole bunch of moving parts here. And it may be that when I transition, say, Sonora PD, if they wanted to transfer to LA might not be ready to receive a next gen 911 call at that time. There might be some 10-digit transfer capability that exists now, but it's not a 911 transfer. So once LA is ready, we can go back into the CPE and update the star code so that it points to the URI of LA. So I think in the north, you know, the PSAPs that are going to benefit from this the most, obviously county sheriffs have a huge transfer cluster, as every police department in their county they transfer to, normally every surrounding sheriff, the highway patrol, and then multiple fire districts, including CAL FIRE. So, and we know there's transfers today that are happening across 10-digit transfer because we don't have, let me go back a couple lines or a couple, because we don't have off the selective router a circuit connecting them today. And so the only way to do it in today's world is to do a 10-digit transfer, which is not 911. Once next gen is built out, we will identify those transfers that you're making across 10-digit to another PSAP, and we'll build that URI code in there and build that functionality into your system.
And we have another question. How are you and your team? Let's see here. The carriers that have to secure and provision the new circuits, moving to meet your schedule when it may not be in their best interest to do this quickly.
All right, so that's a great question. So, so far, we have not encountered that. However, what's probably more likely, and the term best interest is kind of a loaded question, but what we do think is much more likely is there might be a carrier that says, we're willing to make the transition for the Sonora selective router. However, we can't get down to the granular level to guarantee that it's only Sonora PD traffic when we make the transition. It's quite likely it could include traffic for every single PSAP connected to the selective router, in which case we would move that OSP transition later once we've got a dotted line connected to every single PSAP in every single transfer cluster that's connected to the Sonora selective router. And then that OSP would transition. A couple of originating service providers are doing major network upgrades, and they've asked us, hey, if you can wait until April of 2021 for us to transition, that would help us. And we've said, sure, we can wait till April. Now, if an originating service provider comes to me and says, hey, we'd like to wait until January 2022, we're going to say, no way, that's not happening. So we have a definite timeline. And right now, the conversations with the originating service providers have been going very well. They've been very helpful and willing to make this transition because it's a more reliable communication path than what the selective routers are, and in some cases it's a cost reduction for them to make the transition to next gen. So that's a great question.
And I guess one more: when PSAP A has transitioned, PSAP B hasn't, the transfers back and forth, are we at that point limited to 10-digit? We're not transferring alley information, or is there a stopgap until everyone is up on the new system?
Yeah, so that's the beautiful thing about this this transition plan. If a call arrives into a PSAP across the legacy selective router, you transfer it across the legacy system. If a call arrives into the PSAP across Next Gen 911, you transfer it across Next Gen 911. And we will not transition any traffic to Next Gen 911 until you have the ability to transfer via 911, Next Gen 911, to all the PSAPs you're transferring to today. So no, you're not going to lose any functionality, and we're not going to introduce 10-digit transfers where they don't exist today. Okay, I have just a couple more graphics. So let me run through those. This is our schedule. I've already talked about this one. The other thing we're doing, and we want to make sure this is clear, is we're doing a tremendous amount of testing before we even get to your PSAP. And this testing, it has not gone completely smoothly, as no test ever does. And we're uncovering a lot of things that need to be corrected in the system long before we go live. And this graphic kind of shows at a high level what that testing is. We built a lab here at CalOES. It's got Vesta equipment in it, it's got Viper equipment in it, and it has all of our next-gen 911 service providers in there. Not all PSAPs have Vesta and Viper, but a vast majority do. Over 90% are on those two call handling solutions. And so that's enabling us to do PSAP testing, OSP testing, NG911 testing, and system monitoring long before we come to your PSAP and begin any kind of go live plan. So that's where we're at right now in the process. And this lab that we've set up is really validating that this is a true i3 end-to-end network, and that we've got the ability to support all of these i3 functions that need to be part of the next-gen 911 network. And we're able to validate that in the lab. And we've been working on this testing now for a couple of months. And we're discovering that as a result of that, there's a couple of software upgrades that need to happen with Vesta and Viper at your PSAP. And so we're going to coordinate that. And we're also learning that on the next-gen 911 side, that we had to make sure that each of these different vendors could communicate from an interoperability perspective with one another, because there's calls traversing those networks. So that's where we are today. This testing is ongoing, and as soon as we finalize the testing, the rest of the schedule finalizes. But without the testing being completed, very difficult to tell you on this date I'm going to do this thing, because we haven't finished the testing integration yet. So that's kind of where we are with next-gen 911. There's many other elements associated with this, but I didn't want to take too much time, and I tried to focus on those things that are near term and have the most likelihood to directly impact the PSAP and your operations and what you're doing. So I have at least 10 minutes left for questions, and I want to open it up to the group of anything I haven't covered, or any other questions that you might have.
Hey, Budge, it's Doug Kiner again from Mountain View. When a transfer cluster has been transitioned to the next-gen network and everything is normal, I guess, or we're transferring across the next-gen network, when you do have incoming 911 calls being delivered by the next-gen network, and then it is appropriate for you at the PSAP to do a 10-digit transfer, perhaps, you know, it's not really a 911 call. It needs to go to a city resource or animal control, other things where they're not available on the network. Will our facilities at the PSAP handle the transfer three-way party call and sustain the call for the duration, or will we transfer that back out through some other method in the 911 network?
So that's a great question, Doug. And the answer is it depends. And here's why it depends. So if you look on the screen that I have now, there are 2 star codes that are entered into the selective router today for Sonora PD. They're 911 translation services and poison control. And those are pretty common statewide. Those star code transfers would be mapped to a URI, and that transfer, if the call came in on NextGen and you needed to facilitate this transfer, it would go back out to a URI, and it would hit your NextGen core service provider, who interfaces with the PSTN and gives you the dial tone to make that 10-digit transfer. If you're not using a star code through a selective router to facilitate the transfer, meaning you've got a PBX or some local switch that's installed in your dispatch center that your CPE is directly interfacing with for that 10-digit transfer, that transfer will continue to happen that exact same way it happens today.
Okay, great. So And these are great examples, certainly poison control being one we have, as well as the translation service. So it's very likely that these most frequently used resources would ultimately have URIs on the next gen network, whereas your 10 different city hall extensions you transfer occasionally to would not.
Exactly. And those are going through your local PBX, and there's an exchange between your CPE and that local PBX to accommodate that.
Just like we do today. That would not change.
Exactly. No change. That's absolutely.
I have one other question on the mitigation, or the remediation rather, in the PSAP equipment rooms, and I'm sure perhaps there are others that are similarly situated. It's been a bit of a struggle, and specifically the LTE solution. I don't think, and maybe this is just unique to us, where they evaluated that we have really poor signal strength. We're below ground or below grade, so most of the carriers very struggle with data throughput on LTE. One is horrible, and the other main carrier that we use is passable most of the time. But in our equipment rooms, it's really bad. And I haven't heard them say that they're going to remediate that or put in a booster or what we're going to do. Do I need to follow up with my assigned subcontractor to pin them down on that, and then copy the associated project manager for the state?
Yeah, I would definitely work with the project manager for the state. We know there are a few PSAPs where, you've decided to put your equipment room in a concrete bunker 3 stories underground. And that's not real good for RF, especially for LTE. So we're going to need some type of, ideally, it would be best to remote those antennas, or even better, the transceiver, and then you just, Cat5 backhaul it back down into the PSAP. But we know that that's a major impact to your facilities and your infrastructure. So we have to handle all those on a case-by-case basis, but that would be our desire. And the reason why that connection is so important is because if I go back up here to this network design, if a backhoe takes out those 2 fixed fiber connections from both the region and the prime, because they're all running into the same conduit in your center, then that's really your only other layer that you've got to come into your center. So we think it's an important part of the overall design, and we want to do everything we can to get reliable LTE into your center.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's things we can do, just even ahead of time to maybe perhaps grease the wheels for them to be able to get some coverage in there. But that, like you said, case by case.
Yeah.
And my last question is, and it's related, but an adjunct to this is, where does the master purchase agreement for new master purchase agreement fall into this project, or are we going to wait until this is done before that's finalized? Because many of us are coming up on our 5-year mark.
Okay, so that's a great question. So we are going to be sending out, I thought it was by the end of this week, it might be by the end of next week, a test plan to the new CPE provider. So Doug's question is, State of California just got a new master purchase agreement for cloud-based and data center-based CPE, or call processing equipment, meaning it will no longer be on-prem. And that relies on the 911 network that we're building out for next gen in order to deliver the calls to the PSAP. So we absolutely have to be fully transitioned into next gen 911 before we transition to any cloud or data center-based CPE off the new contract. So once we finish this testing you see on the screen here, we're now ready to do lab testing for those new vendors. And there's 11 unique manufacturers through like 19 different contract vehicles that we've added into that master purchase agreement. Each one of them has to pass our lab before they're allowed to sell anything. That way we can make sure it interfaces with the network, has the proper security, and supports the needs of the PSAP. Those that pass lab then, which should happen, well, it may be into January before lab testing is completed for those. And those are those that are ready. There might be some that are still doing development work and they're not ready for testing, but we are. You'll get a short list of who those are, and then you'll be able to start working with those vendors to see who you like. And then that transition schedule at the soonest would look like whenever you're completely transitioned over to next gen 911, whether that's May, June, July of next year, where you are in the schedule. And then we'd be able to talk about replacing your existing CPE with this new tested, vetted solution that's out there.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so if we're next year as our 5-year mark, since
You're
last
perfect.
funding
You're
cycle,
perfect. Yep,
good
to go.
We should not bother our analyst or our regional analyst now, wait till maybe first quarter next year or thereabouts?
Yes, you can let them know your plans, but also make sure your year 6, 7 maintenance is lined up just so we don't run into a crunch. But yeah, you're setting good, Doug, if that's where you're at.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, we got a couple questions for Budge and one for Doug. It says, Doug, what year is that photo taken that you have up there for all of us to see?
It looks like 72, 73.
That was in the 2000s, I swear. and I still have hair.
All right. And for Budge, for communications gap analysis solution selection, is there a formal process to follow if we want a peer review?
Okay, so I'm assuming this is related to the task book. Is that what they're talking about?
Maybe we can get her to come up. Pamela, you there? We'll go to the next one and then we'll come back.
Okay.
All right. Does every PSAP have an NG911 project manager or contact person to understand what is required of them and when it must be ready? And is the equipment for NG911 to be provided by a contractor?
So yes and yes. For the majority of the folks on this call, your normal PSAP advisor is handling your CPE readiness to connect to next gen. And your project manager in CalOES, for almost everybody that's listening, will be Angela Chen in my office, and her email is just angela.chen@caloes.ca.gov, and she can walk you through that process. We, CalOES, are providing all the equipment, we're installing all the equipment, and we're doing the remediation to make sure that the power is there. So that's on us. Does that answer your question, or do you need more detail than that?
Budge, yeah, I'm in the South, believe it or not. So you do have statewide people here.
We do. Kurt Galat will be your point of contact.
Say again?
Kurt Galat.
And is he local here or up in 916 territory?
He's up here, but that's his area of responsibility down there.
Okay, so any questions that the personnel have who have been delegated by the chief to do everything required for next gen 911, and it's totally foreign to them and it scares them to death. So they should be contacting Kurt Gallant, and he will guide them through the whole thing.
Absolutely, yes.
Perfect.
And,
okay.
If you want to send me an email, I think my contact is, well, here, I'll just do it like this. I'll go to this slide and I'll just put my email right here.
Okay.
So you can send it to me, and I'll make sure that that he gets this message and reaches out to you directly.
Okay, Budge. Yeah, I've got your email. We've
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
We're connected, so I'll send you an email.
All right, and even though Halloween is coming, he promises not to scare you to death. Okay.
Okay. Well, I've got customer cities that they're just barely able to do legacy 911, and this is really scary to them. So I'm trying to figure out ways to assuage their fears without jumping in the middle of something that's already going on.
Yes, absolutely. We're happy to help and walk them through. That's a great question.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Dennis, I would back up what Budge is saying. This is a team that is there to support all agencies across the state. And, at UC Irvine, we basically have our power and backhaul ready, and it's just a matter of the CPE equipment. So there's really no need to be fearful of this project. It's being handled quite well. Okay,
well, great. Well, a lot of these people have not made any kind of contact with the state people. So that's why I'm trying to help out there.
All right,
yeah,
very good.
Absolutely. Have them reach out to us. We're happy to talk them through and help them out in any way we can. We know This is a complicated and intimidating process, and we're trying to do everything we can to get the message out there. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, guys, thanks a lot. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
And Dennis, I'm with the Riverside Sheriff's Department, and we've been supporting all our local partners too, and have great resources. So if you have any questions or whatnot, you can reach out to me too, and we can help out. Who are you with?
Well, I'm with a consulting firm that we're consulting with some of these PSAPs that are kind of out of the area. This one happens to be up in Ventura County. And they view themselves at the end of the chain of anything, and so that's I'm trying to help get them some comfort.
Oh, okay. I thought there were some ones down south. You're down south, but we're talking about agencies up north.
Well, no, I'm down south, and these people are in Ventura County, which is in the central.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the central region, I can get you all those contacts. We're happy to assist there.
All right, great. I appreciate it, Budge. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Tim. Yeah, Tim, I'm with CPRA also, so we
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
great. Yeah, and for if anyone else has any questions, we don't have a hard stop date. Budge is willing to stay for the next 3 hours. I know his schedule's open. But yeah, if there's any more questions or concerns, please jump in. Now's the time. And once we're done here, then we'll be on a break for about an hour. And for those of you that are operations and the rest, I highly recommend the town hall, the 911 PSAP town hall at 1 o'clock. There's also some other great vendor presentations from Aviat and Eventide. But in the group meeting, they're going to have a town hall meeting for pretty much dispatch specific. So that should be really good too. And again, we encourage you, any questions for Budge. I guess I had one in respect to Ali Annie in the near future with the OSPs. So when we have issues, are they going to trace down both with our NG 911 providers, or are we still going to refer back to, AT&T and and some of our other folks, Verizon and whatnot?
Yes, that's a great question. So what we've directed our next gen providers is the moment that we are able to duplicate the update process that exists for Annie and Legacy, so that the carriers only submit and the county coordinators only do one entry and it updates in both places, then we're ready to go live. We don't want to create a duplicate effort. We want the two data sets to be in sync. And then at some point, the SOI updates that are the updates that the carriers make to update the records in the database. Once we're off of the selective routers and we're completely over into next gen, those updates just interact with the next gen 911 network. And that way we don't have this dual reporting function going on.
And speaking of this microwave backhaul, how many different are we going to be able to attach if we have our CPE coming through? We're going to have obviously a ton of network drops in our centers. Are we going to be able to utilize that for more than just the 911 system, or are we going to have separate microwave backups?
So the primary purpose of that microwave backhaul is to support next gen 911. And because it's 911 supported, I'm able to use that. I'm able to use 911 fees to support it. So that's its primary purpose. Now, there is extra backhaul potentially available there. So we could talk with you on what that looks like and what other uses we might be able to do for it, provided we don't increase the capacity need or have a situation where we can't prioritize 911 traffic, that it preempts everything else to get delivered to your PSAP. But if we're able to meet those two requirements, then we could talk about other capabilities for that backbone.
Yeah, do we anticipate, PSAPs with everything going to the cloud, I guess establishing their own link for backup? Because I've talked to my IT people, and that's kind of what their thought is.
No. We won't support that. And basically by state regulatory processes, you can't support that. You can't deliver a 911 call unless it's across the tariff service. So unless your county IT people plan on standing up a regulatory body and submitting themselves to the California Public Utilities Commission, they wouldn't be able to do that.
Interesting. What's the state recommending for backups to all these networks that are, you know, we've had issues with in the past, and everything's going that direction? Do you guys have a recommendation for backup?
So we're obviously building a very robust solution. These IP connections, and there's as many as 6, and for Riverside County, there certainly will be 6 connections in there, and they're all into an SD-WAN controller. The availability of those circuits is probably going to be somewhere 6, 7 nines reliability, and obviously we're going to map that. So once the network's built, the critical vulnerability is not going to be on the network side. Your individual center would probably be much more likely to be impacted than the network that's delivering traffic to your center. And so we're developing a backup policy for that and what it looks like and how we would support that. And the new CPE model really gives you a lot of flexibility as to what you can do in terms of call processing equipment, provided you can overcome the other hurdles that exist with LMR and dispatch and CAD and RMS. But the next gen 911 system will have a lot more flexibility in it. So if we do get to the point where we don't achieve the 5 nines reliability or 6 nines reliability that we're predicting, then we could look at those solutions. But right now, the way we've designed it, with everything being active, and it's going to be significantly more reliable than our current 911 system. Right now, we have anywhere from 10 to 20,000 minutes per month where 911 is not available somewhere in California. When we implement this new system, that 10,000 to 20,000 minutes goes down to less than 26 seconds statewide. So, you know, we feel pretty confident that that's going to be sufficient to meet everyone's needs.
Yeah, and I think more specifically outside of the NG911. So the NG911 has its group of network circuits coming back and forth, and they're all stable. But now we've moved into where our CAD is coming in via network, our CPE is coming in via network, and that's kind of where my mind is thinking, what's the best backup as a PSAP to those, you know, because we've had a lot of issues with network connectivity outside of even our vendors, outside of, you know, that are based in the actual networks themselves.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We're looking at this under a study that was the legislature had us do it. The Senate bill or the Assembly bill was AB 911. We presented this to our long range planning committee. So if you want to get a copy of the report, it is public. We're going to do another meeting first or second week in November to talk this through. And ultimately it'll get briefed out to the advisory board. They'll make a recommendation, and the legislature will either tell us to move forward or not. And it really has to do with this vision of statewide CAD and how do we get true interoperable statewide CAD deployed everywhere. And that's what this plan's about. So that would address the next network element that you're talking about. There still, however, would be a gap on the radio side. And again, if I've got bandwidth dedicated and we don't create a bandwidth increase and we prioritize the traffic that the network is designed to hold, there might potentially be capacity to do some of these other connections, and we just have to look at that.
And it looks like we got a question coming in. Let's see here. Are you seeing typical CPE providers building a blended call handling / CAD system now that everything is coming in IP?
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. I really do. We're not there yet, but I do see these technologies merging together where in the cloud, you'd have a module that does call answering, you'd have a module that does maybe text, and you'd have a module that does CAD, and another one that does RMS, and they're just available through the same provider. So I think that's where we're headed. I really do.